Yeah. So you can
Hello.
Hello.
We're live streaming.
Hello.
Oh, I'm just checking YouTube now.
just,
You might have to click on the message.
Stop.
New.
Stop
why isn't it,
criticizing
why
me
can't
already.
we hear it?
I'll get it in a minute.
We can hear you.
As a very tiny man.
Hello, hello, welcome, welcome.
Hello.
Great.
Come on in, hello, hello.
Give me a minute.
All right.
Okay, so I'm gonna.
Can we mute everyone?
We will. Yep, just everybody come on in.
I only got 42 participants. That's nice.
Welcome, welcome. Come on in. Thank you for joining us. Right.
The volume is loud.
Hello, hello. Nice to see everyone. So, we've got international audience today. We've got Marilyn from Montreal, Canada. Montreal. Hello.
My cousin Marilyn and Michael.
Hello,
Hello.
cousin Randy.
I have that same mirror. That's funny.
It's a family mirror.
Indian.
Looks
All
like
right.
it's funny.
Good. Looks good. Everybody looks good. Good to see everybody. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year.
All right. Come on in. Good program. It's on YouTube, and I'm the only one watching. All right, cool. All right, we actually have a lot to cover, so I guess we will get started. So we're going to mute everybody, and then I start. And I have to unmute myself. All right, great. So I have to share screen first before I do that. Hello, everyone. Okay, got it. Oh, go to the beginning. That would be helpful. Okay, fantastic. And great. All right, everyone. Hello, hello, and welcome back to another season of JGSLI meetings. Nice to see everyone. Thank you for joining us. Okay, so yes, we are JGSLI, our 36th year. We have closed captioning capabilities. As long as they're turned on, you have full control. If you click on the bottom of your screen, you have buttons about live transcript that allows you to show the full closed captioning, and you can change the size. So you have full control. It is now enabled. So we'd love for you to join us. We're start our season. We usually join by the end of the year. So usually around October, we start our membership drive. So again, these are the prices. We have an out-of-town membership for people who don't come from Long Island. So you don't have to be on Long Island anymore to join us. And membership benefits are videos of the meetings are saved in the members only section, and we have our monthly JGSLI online and our thrice a year lineage. Articles are due Tuesday, so if you're writing something, please get them to Anne. And if you have any simchas or anything that you want to put in lineage, please let us know, and we'll be happy to share them with our audience. And our Facebook group is over 1,000 members. So I know I haven't posted anything in like 2 weeks because I was out of the country, but I'm back, and so I'll be able to start posting meetings coming up in the future. So yes, how was your summer? So this was my summer, and this is my older son, Adam, and he got married on the Sunday of Labor Day weekend. So that was what I did this summer. And so, yeah, so that was exciting. And then of course he didn't take a honeymoon because they wanted to go to Australia. So my husband and I decided that we would take one. So I am a little tan, if you would notice. I'm a little tan. I was actually in Cancun for a couple of days. So we took the honeymoon. They said, what are you celebrating? I said, I'm celebrating our son's marriage. So we met a lot of honeymooners. It was very sweet. And then the other big news over the summer for JGSLI was at the IAJGS conference, there were a lot of awards announced, and JGSLI was awarded a Member of the Year. So that was very exciting. Very proud of the group and the board and everyone. And if you haven't seen it, there's like a 2-minute acceptance speech on our YouTube channel that I recorded for the conference. And our own Nolan Altman won the Lifetime Achievement Award. So his acceptance speech is also on our YouTube channel. So if you haven't taken a minute, it's the 2 minutes each. And congratulations to Nolan, as well as Joe Barr, the Jewish Gen Online Worldwide Burial Registry was a project of the year. And that, of course, is also headed by Nolan. So that was another great award. And then to top off all of Nolan's wonderful achievements, the Volunteer of the Year Award was renamed the Nolan Altman Award. So Nolan like just all over cleans up, and we're very proud of him and JGSLI for all the achievements. Oh, and I got the plaque in the mail the other day. It's hard to take a picture of a lucite, but that's what it looks like. So we'll put that up on our Facebook, on our JGSLI.org page. But that's our plaque. So very exciting, very proud of everyone. And just a reminder that you can still watch the conference. You can still sign up and watch some of the videos if you want to till October 5th, or you can purchase the Fleetwood recording. So you still have a little time. And next year it is supposed to be in Philadelphia if it's live, and they moved the dates a little bit to the end of August, but that is the plan for 2022. So hopefully we'll get to Philadelphia. All right, and so now we've got our full schedule for the rest of 2021. So these are our meetings, and we have our family history workshop, and we're going to try another game. We did the Kahoot last year for Hanukkah, and now we're going to try a scavenger hunt. So look out for that for our Hanukkah party game night, and the multi-country panel. And then we have the dates scheduled for 2022 from January to June. So again, we'll be doing Wednesday nights, except one Tuesday in March, and then our Sunday meetings. And we're trying to fill them out with some interesting and entertaining speakers. Again, our annual family history workshop will be Sunday the 7th. And please sign up. We have, if you're interested, it's not just for beginners, but it'll be the 4 hours, and it's all going to be on Zoom. So look for details on our workshop page. If you have any questions, just please let us know. And this is the multicultural country panel. So we've added Poland. There was a big interest in it. And so Hadassah Lipsius has graciously agreed to moderate it with a Polish researcher, Anna Wernicka, who has a PhD. So, and then we added Hungary as well. So keep that in mind. And those will be our breakout rooms in December. Roots Tech is going to be virtual again. And so you can look for that online. Okay, and we're ready for our tip of the month, and it's going to be Nolan Altman, and it's the Year of Confusion. So I'm going to stop sharing. I think, how do I stop sharing? No, how do I stop sharing? Oh, no, can I stop sharing? Alex, where's the stop sharing button?
On the bottom, or?
Yeah, it's not popping up for me. I have everything on the top. Oh, there it is. Stop share. Got it. Got it. There we go. Okay, so we're going to let Nolan do his tip of the month, and then I will be back.
Can you see my screen? I don't see it. There we go. Now you see it? Okay. So
You also see the
We see the presenter
next
view.
one. Yeah.
I'm sorry?
It's showing the presenter view to everyone. I don't know if you have notes or.
Let me try that again. Maybe. How's that?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So thanks, Bonnie. I was reading a history magazine, and there was an article called The Year of Confusion. And so I thought I knew what that was about. The Year of Confusion, for all of you Latin lovers, is Annus Confusionis. I thought that this referred to a time not in the very distant past, which actually was in September 3rd, 1967, when in the country of Sweden, they decided that all traffic, instead of being on the left side of the road, should be on the right side of the road. And they even sold gloves where you could wear these to remind yourselves that the right side green was the right side and the left side red was the wrong side. And, how did this work out? It didn't work out very well. And so that's what I thought the year of confusion was, but it wasn't. This was probably the day of confusion, but the year of confusion referred to 46 BC. Now, I know that a lot of you probably don't have your family trees going back to 46 BC, but hang with me for a minute and you'll see where I'm going with all this. 46 BC was the year that they decided to convert from the most recent Roman calendar to the Julian calendar. Okay, so why did they convert from that calendar to the Julian calendar? Well, the Roman calendar had 12 months in it, but it was based on a lunar year of 355 days. And we know that that's not right? We have 365 days, or certainly close to it. What they used to do was they sometimes would insert a leap month. And when I say sometimes, it was really hit or miss. Sometimes they would put it in, sometimes they wouldn't. Sometimes it would be 22 days or 23 days. And it was usually done in the winter when I guess they thought nobody would notice one way or the other. But that's when they put this extra month in. And what happened was that because they were using this lunar year of 355 days, over time, when it came to 46 BC, they realized they were out of sync by 3 months or 90 years. And so what they decided to do was they were going to transition from that calendar to the Julian calendar, okay? And 46 BC was called the year of confusion because if you take the 355 days that they were using and then you added in the 90 days, 46 BC actually had 445 days in it, the longest recorded calendar year in human history, okay? So the Julian calendar started on January 1st, 45 BC. Remember, we're counting backwards because we're in BC or BCE if you prefer. January 1st became the first day of the year. And then they added 10 days to the calendar to get from 355 to 365. They added 1 day in April, June, September, and November. They added 2 days in January, August, and December. And they kept February with 28 days. Now, they made 2 different kinds of years. They made a normal year of 365 days, and then they made a leap year with 366 days, right? Same as what we have now. So there's a 4-year cycle that consisted of 3 normal years and 1 leap year, which means that the average year, right? 3 at 365, 1 at 366, the average year had 365.25 days. However, we know that the solar year is really 365.24219 days. Now, that's not a big difference, but if you realize that this was done in 45 BC, over time, again, there was a drift in the number of days. And it went all the way up until 1582, when the Julian calendar was out of sync by 10 days. So what did this mean? It means we need a better calendar. In comes Pope Gregory. In 1582, Pope Gregory XIII decides we're going to fix the calendar once again. All right, he reduces the average number of days from 365.25 to 365.2425, which makes it a little closer to what the solar year actually is. It was first adopted by Rome, the area around Rome, and then by the Catholic countries because this was the Pope's calendar. But then subsequently, Protestant countries and Eastern Orthodox countries adopted the calendar as well. And so what happened was on October 4th, 1582, instead of the next day being October 5th, they added those 10 days and you got to October 15th. All at once, the calendar changed and 10 days were passed. And so now if you were looking at certain documents, you might see an old style calendar being the Julian calendar, or the new calendar, the Gregorian calendar, which is what we use today. This becomes more relevant to our research because here is a Warsaw Russian marriage certificate. This was done in Warsaw, but it was under the Russian Empire. And the Russian Empire in 1907 was in the midst of converting from Julian to Gregorian. And if you notice, this area that I have in the red box is the date of this marriage license. And so the month says November/December, and the date says 23/6. And so what we have here is a document that is dual dated, right? It's got the Julian date and it's got the Gregorian date because it was prepared around the time that the calendar was being transitioned. As another example, this is an obelisk where Thomas Jefferson is buried. And if we look at the bottom, it's got his dates, date of birth and date of death, okay? And what it says is that he was born in 1743. Now, in 1743, there was no United States. He was born in Virginia, a colony of England, and England didn't change their calendars until 1750s. I think it was 1752. So on his date, where it says born April 2nd, 1743, it says OS, meaning old style. That's a Julian date. When he died after the United States was the United States, and after England had already transferred to the Gregorian calendar, and so 1826 is the new style calendar. The Gregorian calendar rules, pretty simple. Every year that's exactly divisible by 4 is a leap year. Now, if you remember the Y2K fiasco we went through, you might remember all of these rules. Otherwise, you might think somebody made this up for fun. They couldn't have been serious. Except for years that are exactly divisible by 100. So if the year is divisible by 100, it's not a leap year, even though it's divisible by 4. Except again, if any of those years that are divisible by 100 are divisible by 400, then it is a leap year. All right, how confusing is that? So 1700, 1800, and 1900, even though they're divisible by 4, that would make them a leap year, but they're divisible by 100, so they're not a leap year, and they're not divisible by 400. So those years are not leap years. But if you remember the year 2000, it was divisible by 400, and so the year 2000 was a leap year. And this is how they were adjusting for that extra fraction of a day over time. This is just a chart, a listing of all the different countries and areas when they adopted the new calendar. And so if you're talking about your own personal research now, you'll see that the German states, a lot of them did this in the 1600s, but now we're going into the 1700s with England and Ireland. And then when you get into Eastern Europe, this is the 1900s. So certainly you may find that there are date differences, and it's important to know when they transferred and changed their calendar, so you would know really what those dates were, regardless of what's marked on the individual documents that you're looking at. And you'll see Saudi Arabia, most recently, 2016, just changed over from their calendar to the Gregorian calendar. This is a chart that just shows the number of days difference that you had to adjust when you made that change. So if you were to make that change back originally in 1582 all the way up to 1700, they adjusted for 10 days, right? You'd go to sleep on the 5th, you'd wake up on the 15th, you lost 10 days. But the later that you went on, when you made those adjustments, like Saudi Arabia, for instance, they would have adjusted for 13 days, right? So the later that you went on, the more days you had to adjust for. So now somebody may be saying, well, Nolan, you work on Jobar, you see a lot of dates. You ever see anything interesting having to do with dates in a Jobar spreadsheet? Huh? Do you? Huh? Do you? And I would say, yeah, actually I did. And this was really interesting. This is the Portuguese cemetery in France. Now, going back into a little French history on the bottom, you will remember that there was a French Revolution. And during the French Revolution, they basically changed everything, including their calendar. And they got rid of all the months in the calendar and renamed them. They started with year 1, which they use in Roman numerals. And even a week, I think, was something like 10 days. The week is the only portion of time that's not, doesn't refer to some kind of a movement of an astronomical body. So you can make a week any number of days you want. And so you see in column H, these are the dates based on the French Revolutionary calendar. And so you see months like Prairial and Gemini and Thermidor and Brumaire. right? And you see the years from 1 to 12. It only lasted for about 12 years. So on this one spreadsheet for this one cemetery, I actually have dates of death given in 3 different calendars. We have based on the Gregorian calendar, based on the French Revolutionary calendar, and based on the Hebrew calendar. All right, so 2 last things that I found when I was doing the research for this little presentation. Did we ever have a February 30th? Well, believe it or not, we did. And it happened in Sweden yet again. What happened was, remember I told you people just added those 10 days on and went from the 5th to the 15th. But Sweden said, no, we don't want to do that. We're going to do this gradually over time. So they said for the next 40 years, and every 4 years is a leap year, for all those years, we're just going to forget about adding the leap year and we're going to catch up that way. And so that was the plan that they used. Except there was something called the Great Northern War. And they were so swept up in this Great Northern War that they literally forgot to make the adjustments in 1704 and 1708. And so what did they do? Well, in 1712, they said, let's go back to the Julian calendar, but we're going to add a day to February. And February was a leap year in 1712. And so it already had 29 days. And voila, you get February 30th. Only in Sweden. All right. Finally, they decided, this is too complicated. We thought gradually was the way to go, but forget it. We're just going to add them all in. And so in 1753, they converted to an actual Gregorian calendar. And lastly, as long as we did February 30th, was there ever a February 31st? Well, for all of you that have seen my Jogar presentation and my headstones, and all the examples I give, you may have remembered seeing this one where I ask you if you see anything weird. And of course, it's the date, February 31st. And I always used to tell people, well, this was not a leap year. This was a super leap year. But when I was doing the research for this, I actually came across this headstone for the first time in something else. And what they said was they used February 31st on a headstone if it was for an unknown date. Now, I never heard that before, but it does kind of make some sense because it's just so obvious that February 31st is not a real date. Why it just doesn't say 1869 and why they need to put February 31st in there, I don't know. But at least I found some other reason as to why there might be a February 31st on a headstone. And there you have my tip of the month having to do with the transition from the Julian to the Gregorian calendars and the movement of the Swedish traffic from left to right.
Always Sweden.
Always Sweden, yes.
All right, thanks, Nolan. All right, I am going to go back to sharing my screen. Okay, so before we get to our full presentation, we are also going to do a quick conference review. So I have a lot to cover, and so I'm just going to do it all myself rather than calling up the individual people. And I'm going to try to fly through this so that we can get to Jeff in about 15-20 minutes. So I had asked people to give me some feedback on the IAJGS conference from different perspectives of people who attended or gave some classes or just participated or even went for the first time. So I'm gonna share with you some comments that people have made and what they did. So I'll start with me. So I was on the conference programming planning committee. And so I actually got to read all the submissions for the presentations and help choose which ones we were going to present at the conference. And I'm actually going to be on the planning programming committee again next year. So if you want to make a submission for it, it's going to come up soon. Anyway, so I also then hosted and moderated 10 sessions, and it was really great because I really got to have some really wonderful speakers in the Jewish genealogy world. And you can see I had Karen Franklin and Stanley Diamond and Robin Maggott and Krista Cowan and Adam Brown, Michael Tobias, Dick Goldman, Stephen Morse, and Serena Rofe. So it was really exciting. I got to kind of hang out with them backstage and help them with their presentation, and they were all wonderful presentations. So if you haven't seen those, I definitely recommend them. And then a couple other ones I went to, there was a leadership development series. It had 3 sessions. The first one focused on how to get millennials involved with your organization, because the way they approach groups and management is different than the way it had been done in the past. The second one was about recruiting and keeping volunteers. And then the third one was about technology and switching to hybrid meetings. So we have a lot of things to think about and things to use to go forward when we get back to the, in-person versus hybrid. I didn't get to attend a lot of the SIG meetings during the conference, but I went back and I watched a lot of them afterwards. So I didn't miss them. And those are the ones that are not going to be on the Fleetwood recording. So if you want to listen to the SIG meetings, you have to do them before October 5th. Sorry, Laura Liebman is great. I had seen her present before, and she had a couple of presentations, and she was the Lucille Gudis Memorial Lecture. So her presentations are always wonderful. And then, of course, the games that we had, the Genealogy Death Match and Who Wants to Be a Rothschild, were always a lot of fun. Yeah, that was highlights. So some of my problems, I had Steve Morse, and I could hear him, but he couldn't hear me. He had no audio. So I'm laughing because this is a man who literally invented computers, and he had the most technical problems of anybody I had to deal with. But we worked it out, and I actually I spoke with him on my cell phone and it was very funny. I had to mute and unmute and talk to him through 2 different medium, but we got through the presentation and it went very well. And then the keynote speaker, we were ready to go. It was 20 minutes and he wasn't there. And I called him up and he's like, I thought it was tomorrow. And there was just a miscommunication with the day, and he showed up, but it was he was supposed to be in his office and he was at home, so we had some technical problems, but we got through it, so we managed. And some highlights for me, of course, winning the awards, making the connection. So Michael Tobias, my best friend's daughter, is actually studying for a master's degree program in Glasgow. So I connected her with Michael Tobias, and now she's working in the synagogue is having a Holocaust museum type thing, and that's her studies. And so she got hooked up into the whole Jewish community in Glasgow by connecting with Michael. So that was great. And when I hosted Krista Cowan, she literally showed up 15 minutes before the session, and she had no makeup on. And she's like, give me 10 minutes. She goes off, puts her face back on. She comes back 5 minutes before the session, and she's perfect. She's good to go. She's a pro. So that was really fun hosting her as well. Okay, so Rhoda was, she gave 3 presentations, the beginners 103 and 104, and evidence analysis, and she got some really great feedback. She did the Lit Back SIG meeting and the Subventionist Birds of a Feather meeting. There are always difficulties learning how to figure out the virtual conference. And of course, when you're at home, life is there. So you're not full time in the conference. Sometimes you have other things going on. The mentoring was something that we tried this year, and it's worked out sometimes, but it was hard making appointments. So they'll definitely have challenges that they'll want to work out next year. And of course, it's hard to do in-person talking face-to-face with people. But she had some major breakthroughs. She found her great-great-grandfather in the Gallery of Missing Husbands. And she's still listening to recordings. And, they worked really hard to get the conference, virtual. So hopefully that worked out mostly at most of the time. Okay, so Fern listed some of her favorite programs, and she used a volunteer translator. So that was actually something that you could still do virtually. Shelley Polero, I think, was in charge of that. So that worked out well. She really liked Gil Bartage's DNA talk and thought that was really helpful. And prioritizing longest segments and things like that. And also Miriam Weiner did her new site and her new database with more names on our website. So that was really a highlight for Fern as well. Steve Turner gave 2 presentations. So one of them was called 2 Stories of Finding New Branches of My Family Tree. And the other one he did with Rabbi Kolesnik from his Gesher Galicia group. So again, if you want to, his presentations are still available to be watched through the conference. Okay, what's going on? All right, Gary also presented Alex Krakowski project, and if you've heard, he's presented to us as well. So with Joel, and they interviewed Alex, and they talked about funding his scanners and winning court battles in Ukraine. We'll probably have some updates from Gary over the course of the year also on updates with Alex Skorkowski's project. All right, so this is Jeff's experiences. And I just kind of listed a lot of the sessions that he went to. And of course, as Jeff is our programming VP, he was taking a big interest on who might be good for us. And one of them, for instance, is Michael Morgenstern. So he is going to be our October Wednesday night meeting. Some of the other sessions that he went to with Ellen Coet and Eli Rabinowitz and Miriam Weiner, and more sessions that he went to. So we will look forward to having maybe some of these people. Oh, and Alex Kalzareth, his mapping. I have to watch that one. So these could be some of the interesting things that maybe we'll set up for next year. And then I had asked Sandy Perline. Sandy was her first time attending, so I kind of wanted some of her impressions. So I just took a snippet of some of the things that she sent me, and she's going to put an article in Lineage, so it'll be a longer presentation, right, Sandy? But she loved it, and like the Steve Morse, his 1950 census, he used Donald Duck, as to find him on the census. It was really fun, and the people in the chat were hysterical. And just a lot of information, like somebody like Emily Garber gave so much information, and Anna Fector being so supportive. And so she had a lot of positives, and I just pulled a few out, great handouts. And you can see what if presenters had other sessions, either maybe live or on demand. So if you liked somebody's speaking style, you can find more presentations by them. You can come and go. That's one of the benefits, I guess, of being virtual. So if you have, a job or a family, you can still attend to them while being at the conference. And you can pick and choose what you wanted. They had, look for matzo balls. It was a little game. And Sandy, I saw she was on the leaderboard and she won that day, and she got a free subscription to newspapers. So there was some fun games to play. And the mentors and translators, and being able to still watch the lectures through October 5th. But of course, when you do this virtually, you do get sidetracked by your family and your job and things like that. So it's not always easy to just focus the whole day as if you were, in a real life conference. We had some vendors in the exhibition hall, but yeah, so I know, like, when we've been in a real conference, you get things to buy too, like, a couple of necklaces I bought there and things like that. So those kinds of things you do miss by being virtual. So, it's not the same, obviously, but, we tried as much as possible to make it as good of an experience for everybody. But bumping into people at elevators and sitting next to somebody, like I remember in Cleveland, I sat next to a woman, and it turns out, her husband and my husband went to high school together. It's like, you just don't get that in a virtual conference. But she loved it, and she can't wait to come, and hopefully we'll be back in Philly. So next year. So that's the hope. So that was quicker than I thought. Good. So that was the conference, and I hope it always gets people excited to plan for next year. We are literally starting to plan for next year. So keep the August dates in mind. Okay, so now I am going to introduce our speaker. And so today's speaker is our Vice President of Programming, Jeff Austin. So let me read his introduction. So Jeff has been actively studying his family history since joining Genie in 2013, but his interest goes back to his early 20s, when his family was visited by previously unknown relatives from South Africa. He is now aware of ancestors from the Kolomaya area of Western Ukraine, Podolia in Ukraine, Kiev, also in Ukraine, and Kaunas, Lithuania. He's been a member of JGS LI since 2016 and currently is VP of Programming. When Jeff is not doing genealogy, he's running a travel agency in Woodbury or spending time with his wife, Ellie, figuring out ways to visit their 3 sons in different parts of the country. And it's my pleasure to give you Jeff Austin.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
And now I'm going to share my screen. And we see my screen, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's a good start. So Happy New Year, everybody. And welcome to a virtual tour. I'm going to do my best to work through my notes. So thank you for joining me on this virtual tour of Galicia. I hope you enjoyed your virtual flight to get here. You have arrived safe and sound in the central market of Kolomia. Kolomia is the heart of Pakutia, the historical area of East Central Europe, situated between the Dniester and Cheremish rivers and the Carpathian Mountains in the southwestern part of modern Ukraine. Don't worry, I'll give you a map in a minute. Your virtual tour will take you to my 5 ancestral towns where you will learn some of the history and see what they are like today, all the time focusing on my ancestors' relationship to these towns. It will be impossible, though, to avoid constant reminders of the Holocaust, as so many of the region's history is tied to that terrible time. Let's see. I seem to be stuck for a second. Okay. I would like to introduce you to your tour guides for the next 3 days. Sorry, for the next 1 hour. Or rather how they looked 64 years ago. From the left is Joseph, my great-grandfather. He was born in Galicia and came to the US in 1902. That's me in the arms of my father, Larry. The man at the end is my grandfather, Sal, who was born on the Lower East Side in 1903. I was always told I was a firstborn son of a firstborn son of a firstborn son of a firstborn son, 4 generations of firstborn sons. As a child, I thought this was pretty cool, and as a young adult, it inspired me to begin my genealogy journey, which I began in earnest in 2013. One of the questions I sought to answer was how far back could I trace this line of firstborn sons? In putting together today's tour, I needed to do a little research on the tour guides. The trail led me to Kolomia. Kolomia is a city of roughly 61,000 people that sits on the Prut River in western Ukraine, approximately halfway between Ivano-Frankivsk and Chernivtsi. And please excuse my pronunciations with all these Russian and Ukrainian word names. The town was 50% Jewish in 1900. The town became the epicenter for the Nazis' attempt at eliminating the Jewish population by serving as a gathering place for Jews from surrounding villages as far away as Horodenka. I discovered Joseph, my great-grandfather, had left Galicia in 1902 with his new bride and settled in the Lower East Side. My grandfather was born a year after they arrived. Here's the ship's manifest, where my great-grandfather was listed as Joseph Gerstenhaber, his mother's maiden name. By 2018, I had a pretty good picture of my great-grandfather's life in New York and a little bit of his family in Galicia. One of the immediate revelations was that he was not a firstborn son, but rather he was the 4th child and 3rd son of Wolf and Devora Ostfresser, and that Wolf was the 2nd child but 1st son of Loser and Esther Ostfresser from Horodenka. It was at this point I thought it was about the possibility of visiting Kolomia in the hope of learning more about Joseph and his family. My opportunity came sooner than I expected. My oldest son, Adam, was invited to fence for the US in the Maccabi games in Budapest, and we planned to attend. Taking a close look at the map, I realized that Kolomia was only 370 miles from Budapest. I would probably not get this chance again, so I made arrangements for my wife and I to spend a few days exploring Kolomia and the surrounding towns prior to going to Budapest. We had the outline for the trip, but I still needed to do the research to pin down exactly what I wanted to see. Well, a quick look at some of the research is I found my 2 times great-grandfather and 3 times great-grandfather and mother on Gesher Galicia, and was able to track down the birth index showing birth index from Horodenka showing Sulam Wolf birth in 1859. I then found the next record for Zosia Ostresser on JRI Poland. She was born at house number 146 in Ivanoci, which is present-day Ivanice. Further research on JRI Poland turned up the birth record of Rifsia Ostresser, born in 1893 in Hoshimierz, house 250. Zosia turned up again in Kolomia in 1912 at Rheineck 63 with the birth of her son Wilhelm, and 1915 with another birth. I did not have to do much research for the last clue. My great-grandfather was a member of Anshe Obertin Synagogue. His brother was the rabbi, and my father had his bar mitzvah there in 1943. Additionally, he is buried in the Obertin section of Mount Zion. I provided all this information to my guide, Sasha Kovalchuk, so he could put together an itinerary for us. We headed off to Ivano-Frankivsk via Kiev on Ukrainian Airlines. Fortunately, everything went smoothly, and Sasha met us outside baggage claim. After a typical Ukrainian lunch, we headed in Ivano-Frankivsk, we headed to Kolomia to meet our guide. But first, a quick refresher on where we were going. Here is Galicia laid over present-day Eastern Europe. We were heading to the western edge of the Ivano-Frankivsk region. Here is present-day Ukraine. Kiev is in the middle. I can point to that. So here's Kiev. And then we were going to spend the next 3 days in this little rectangle on the southwestern edge of the country. As we zoom into the rectangle, we can see the placement of our 5 towns. Kolomia down here, Horodenka, our next stop, Obertin, Hotomir, and Ivanice. Okay, so now the first city on our list is Kolomia. Kolomia, and you can find it spelled a variety of ways. This is the current accepted way, at least what I've seen most often, is a city of roughly 60,000 people today. According to Jewish Gen, the Jewish population in 1900 was 16,568. I recently saw that the Yiskra book for Kolomia has become available through Gesher Galicia. We arrived in Kolomia mid-afternoon and met our guide, Solomia, at the Hotel Pisanka, which was to be our home for 2 nights. The hotel sits adjacent to the Pisanka Museum, or Decorated Egg. We're only a few blocks from the Rheineck. The hotel was simple and clean, shot of our room, but we spent very little time there. We then proceeded by car to meet Yasha at his synagogue. Yaakov, or Yasha Zalishchaika, is the leader of the Jewish community in Kolomia and was our guide for the next hour or so. I recorded all of our guides, and here's a sample of our conversation. Yasha only spoke Ukrainian, so Sasha served as our interpreter.
В 1630 году.
This synagogue was built and finished in 1630.
Oh.
Значит, она была деревянная до пожара 1858 или 60 года,
And
да?
once built, it
Городского.
was
Центр был деревянный.
timber synagogue, but until the fire in 1853, 1853, да?
58.
In 1858, until the fire of 1858.
Вот этот весь центр, это был еврейский квартал, чтобы вы знали.
The
Все
whole
построено было
downtown
евреями.
here, around here, all this neighborhood, it was a
И это все сгорело.
Jewish quarter, and everything like turned to ashes after the fire.
И 12 лет приблизительно отстраивали, ее уже открыли в том виде, как сейчас, ну, кирпичную, в 1870 году.
And it took 12 years to rebuild everything, including synagogue, and it was reopened in 1870. 1770.
В этой синагоге в 1725 году молился Балшентов со своими товарищами, основатели хасидизма.
And in this synagogue, Baal Shem Tov, he is buried in Medjugorje. He,
Да-да-да, он похоронен в Меджигорске.
his ohel there, and he prayed here with his like mates here in 1825, когда она была еще деревянная.
1725.
Когда она была еще деревянная.
1700, да.
In 1725, when it was from timber. And our rabbi, he's from New York, from Williams. Williamsburg. He's coming here. I'm going to host him next week.
Шмил Вайнбергер.
So our rabbi is Shmuel Weinberger, and according to the Ukrainian law, he is allowed to stay here only 90 days. Therefore, every single time when he comes here, you know, or any time, just to let him stay 1 year here, I filed an official request to the government, and government easily allows to stay him, and you know, so he's not like a part-time rabbi, you know, he's a
Full-time, but you have to get permission for him to be here all the time?
to be here because it's like it's immigration law, Ukrainian.
Right.
But
Oh,
yes, it's according to the immigration law.
Because he's not Ukrainian.
He's not Ukrainian. This
That's
is the
right,
reason. Yes,
okay.
but every single time I submit my request, and they just local authorities, they allow him to stay 1 year. You know, it's simply like bureaucracy to submit another request
Right.
because
История такая.
he's American passport holder.
Смотри,
Is
что
there a reason why
Коломея,
it's an American rabbi versus a Ukrainian rabbi, or they're just,
No,
Ukrainian
they
rabbi?
simply don't have any Ukrainian rabbi except
Okay.
Rabbi Kolesnik.
Okay.
In one
He's
of
really
his,
the one.
He's local, yes. And the rest, and why I managed to encourage Weinberger to come here, because his great grandfather, you know, seven generations back, he's buried. Как его имя?
Лихтенштейн.
Baruch
Фамилия.
Lichtenstein.
Okay.
He's buried here in local
Садик он.
cemetery, and he was a tzaddik.
Он был 24 года главным раввином Коломыи.
And he was, when he was alive,
Еще
for
при Австро-Венгрии.
24 years, he was a main, like a chief rabbi of
I think I remember reading.
Yes. He said that the problem in our community is that old people, they are dying, and
Right.
For the last 3 years, 14 members of our community, Jews, they have passed away. And if I am 66 years old, I am the youngest one in this community.
Значит, сейчас в общине 81 человек.
And currently our community in Коломия consists of 81 Jews.
Но много людей уезжает за границу. Если брать в среднем, за год 8-10 человек уезжают.
But many Jews, they left for
На ПМЖ.
and
В основном
talking
уезжают.
about average figure, 8-10 people every year they leave Коломия for somewhere else.
Is the Jewish community tolerated? Is there any oppression or anti? Yeah.
Yes, and we are going to repair the outside. We are going to repair the facades, and well, we can go out and you can see that some places, you know, they have other color because those hooligans, those
Painted
like
up.
Значит,
scalawags, they just put some, you know, some insulting signs.
мы
on the
восстановим наступает. Ты ничего не сделаешь.
Yes, and Soviets, they turned this place into the warehouse
Oh, okay.
of salt. And this is why after such a long time of keeping salt here, the walls, they simply incinerated with the salt. And this is why whatever I did, whatever I tried to do,
После
you know,
этого
salt was always there. This is why I created this ventilation system. But still, I'm going to show you some places where you can see salt is still on the wall.
После этого тут был спортзал медучилища.
And after the salt warehouse, it was a gym for local medical school.
До 96-го года. Пока нам не отдали это помещение.
Until 1996, it was a gym.
Я как раз был тогда депутатом горсовета, и мы его забрали.
Yes, and at that time I was like a member of local city council, city hall, and this is how we granted this
Okay.
В 1630 году.
This
The Beit Knesset Yerushalayim is the only working synagogue right now in Kolomia. So our next stop was the first Jewish cemetery. The cemetery was established in 1606, but is mostly empty except for the old synagogue and a monument in the field. We'll let Yasha talk about his plans for this area.
This is exactly
Он тут жил, вот тут на втором этаже.
Волшемтов, садик, where he lived, second floor.
Вот тут.
He lived with his
Сейчас
friends.
мы проект заканчиваем. Я думаю, в конце сентября мы начнем восстановление этой синагоги.
Yes, and the project is over, and I mean that like documentation for the project is completed, and end of September is a due date. We start, you know, complete restoration,
Oh, really?
Вот
practical
еще
work.
было вот там дальше.
This sign on the wall, at Orenstein Synagogue reads Beit HaMidrash of Kamianka, built 5376, or our year 1616. According to local tradition, the Baal Shem Tov, may his merit protect us and his students, prayed here while he lived here in his youth. Until the war, hundreds of people prayed here from sunrise to midnight. In addition, in that location, there functioned a Talmud Torah and Ezras Nashim, a prayer area for women.
So this will all be restored.
Это все будет полностью восстановлено согласно проекту. Yes.
Так как было,
Да.
мы нашли в интернете все, как оно было,
As it
фотографии.
was during that time, we found all the drawings.
Единственное, что нам
that's
надо
what I was-
будет
that's
решать вопрос, или будем мы в стены перекрывать,
Always my
здесь нет
next
фундамента.
question.
And the only question we have is we have to remove temporarily all the walls because there is no basement, there is no foundation. So we have to decide.
Это Вайнбергер, это его частность, он купил. Он просто дал мне доверие на все управление.
Weinberger, the rebar
Коломея.
from New York,
Да-да, он-
Rabbi of Kolomea, he bought it and he has it in his private property. And I have a power of attorney
Старая
to do
баня
all
он
the
тоже
work
купил.
here.
Старая баня, он тоже купил, там будет миква,
А это старая баня, да?
на Кринычной там, внизу. Мы проезжали.
Also we passed the old
Там будет
public bath, and he also bought that property, and we are going to turn it into the mikvah.
Не-не, миква, ресторан и готель.
And we are going to have
Kosher
mikvah,
restaurant.
kosher restaurant, and hotel there.
Wow.
Really?
Разместить.
We have regular, we host.
Мне звонил товарищ из Лондона, приедет 50 человек.
There's a lot of
You know,
For
for
the Baal Shem
example,
Tov, but nobody wants to
Через
live
2
here.
недели приедет 50 человек. Но они приезжают как? Из Франции целыми группами.
they come here, for example, in 2 weeks I'm going
Бывают
to host
такие дни,
50% from London,
слышишь,
and they come there.
бывают такие дни, что приезжают 3-4 автобуса.
And
Кроме
you know,
субботы они
you
приезжают.
don't have anywhere
Суббота нельзя
to
ехать.
host them.
right. There's not.
А как вы едете в субботу, я не пойму. Можно ходить пешком только.
There's a lot of interest to coming here and seeing.
Here is a close-up of the sign at the entrance to the cemetery. The sign on the left says Association Ohalai Tzadikim Gidrei Avos under the leadership of Rabbi Yisrael Meyer Gabai, and gives the guard's phone number. The sign on the right says the very old cemetery of the city of Kolomia from the years 5366 till 5547, corresponding to 1606 to 1786. Finally, it says called the Beit Aleman Akop Kominka Cemetery.
We have a joke when someone, you know, approach a rabbi and asking, you know, can I shave on Saturday? And rabbi said, of course not. You know, it's Saturday, it's Shabbat. But rabbi, you I look at you, I see that you shave today. Today is Shabbat. But I didn't ask anyone, you know. This is
I've heard that, yes.
Right.
We left Yasha after the cemetery and moved to the location of one of the ghettos. Germans used Kolomia as a gathering place for Jews from all the neighboring towns. There was not much to see now, just apartments in an empty courtyard. There were no markers to identify this used to be the ghetto of what had happened here between 1941 and 1944. Here's a picture from inside, and then here's a picture of where the ghettos were located. We were able to walk from the ghetto to the cemetery at the corner of Simon Petliura Street and Anton Chekhov Street. This cemetery is part of a public park now that connects to a small lake. The entrance sign says, Old Jewish Cemetery of Kolomia from 1783 to 1894. Yasha had gathered all the matzivot from Kolomia into this area and had constructed 4 concrete walls with plans to build more. This served the dual purpose of providing a place to view the gravestones while protecting from further decay. I will explain the black symbols that you see appearing on some of the walls in a minute. Here's a close-up of some of the stones. I had asked a Matziva expert to translate some of these transcriptions for me, but they had a tough time, as you'll notice that a lot of the inscriptions that run together. And they had a tough time understanding the 18th and 19th century abbreviations. Here are some pictures of the different piles of matzivot throughout the park. Yasha had told us how the grave of one of the tzaddiks had been vandalized, so he built a brick ohel around it for its protection. Here's a close-up of the graffiti spray painted on the walls and door. It is the work of vandals or hooligans and scalawags, using Sasha's words, and it shows a person throwing a Star of David into a trash can. In this one, the Star of David is smeared out, so you cannot really tell what it is. Sasha had mentioned that there was some controversy about this area. The Jews of Kolomia wanted to preserve the area as an Orthodox cemetery, but the city claims it belonged to everybody because it is a place of persecution of all Ukrainian people. This is why they put up a cross. Yasha continues to do his thing there, building more walls, and will eventually will cover all the matzivot that are stacked there, but it will still remain a public park and a walkway to the lake. After the cemetery, we visited the Museum of History of Kolomia. The museum contains a section on the Jewish history of the city. The material is roughly put together, but it did provide a little more insight into what went on in Kolomia before the war. Life in general is normal with Jews in many different occupations. There was one room with Jewish artifacts. Here's a display case containing items from the Great Synagogue, a tallis, tefillin, pictures of worshipers, a piece of the Torah, and a book of records. A picture of the Great Synagogue in its heyday. A picture of the last rabbi of Kolomia, Joseph Lau, who was shot by Germans in 1943, alongside a list of rabbis dating back to Wolf Abraham in 1664. Below that is a picture, it's a famous picture of Emperor Franz Joseph's visit to Kolomia in 1917. The caption reads, "In the first half of the 20th century, followers of Judaism were close to 43% of the people of Kolomia. 1912, 18,822 persons, and 1925, 19,150 persons." These are pictures of 3 synagogues in Kolomia, including the Beit Knesset Yerushalayim on the top that we visited earlier, and the Ornstein Street Synagogue we saw earlier. The bottom is a picture of the Roman Shukevich Street Synagogue and the facade and floor plans for that synagogue. On the top here is a picture from a wedding in 1932. Below that is a wedding invitation from 1929, and to the right is a birth certificate from 1922. The museum contained pictures and postcards from Kolomia from the late 1800s and the early 1900s. The top left picture is a parking lot for the horses and carriages just off the Rheineck, or main square. The right is an aerial shot from the clock tower. And here's what the Rheineck looks like today from the ground level. I did not realize it at the time, but the postcards gave me a great opportunity to do then and now shots. Here is the entrance to the Rheineck looking south towards the clock tower building around late 19th century. And here's how it looked in 2019 from a similar angle. You can see the similarities and the differences. Slightly different view with a similar angle. And then here's the main square looking north, taken from the small park in the middle, and then the same shot from the other side of the park. You can see how you can make out the same outline for the buildings. Our last tour stop in Kolomia was Sheparivsi, formerly Sheparochi Forest. This is a memorial site honoring the tens of thousands of Jews murdered here during World War II. The Nazis would gather people from the ghetto and march them along the dotted path to the forest, where they would shoot them in front of a mass grave. They then would replace the people in the ghetto with Jews from the neighboring towns. In 1993, a group of survivors and descendants built this memorial, a simple recognition of what had happened here. The original monument had plaques in Hebrew, Yiddish, and Ukrainian. The Ukrainian was vandalized the following year, and a new set of plaques installed without the Yiddish. We stood silently for a long time, absorbing what had happened here 80 years ago. Interestingly, here's a close-up of the plaque. The Ukrainian plaque and the Hebrew plaque are slightly different. The Hebrew adds the words, "and their helpers." This is typical for many memorials we found throughout Ukraine and Eastern Europe. We arrived in Kolomia on Saturday afternoon and left around in the morning on Monday morning, so we had some time to explore the city. Here are some additional shots of areas around the Rheineck. In fact, including up top right, the restaurant we ate in Saturday night, where I struggled to order dinner from an all-Ukrainian menu, but managed to successfully to get steak and potatoes. Women selling flowers on the stoop on Sunday mornings, and some statues and other sites leading up to the market, the farmers market in the Rheineck, and the street leading up to the Rheineck from our hotel. Finally, we did come to Kolomia to see family history. Unfortunately, besides my great-grandfather claiming he was from Kolomia in all of the documents, I have no direct evidence of his being born there or lived there at any time. However, I do have evidence that two of his siblings lived here between 1912 and 1918. I was able to visit the locations on Sobeskiego Street for my great-grandfather's brother, Mordechai, and to see the house on Jidoskech Street, number 68, for my great-grandfather's sister. And that's Kolomia, and now we move on to Horodenka. Our next stop, Horodenka, a town of roughly 10,000 people today, was approximately 1/3 Jewish at the beginning of the 20th century. My connection to Horodenka was through my great-great-grandfather, Sulam Wolf, who was born there in 1859. His father, Laser, had moved from Tlumach to marry Esther. Wolf moved to Ivanochi when he got married, but I believe Loser is buried in Horodenka. Here's the document showing the birth of Sulam Wolf. Horodenka is located approximately 25 miles northeast of Kolomia and took us about an hour. The road is paved and generally in good condition. A little picture of our journey and what the surrounding countryside looks like. And we passed through the towns of Vizdets, Verbitsi, and Chernyatin on the way, as well as seeing a road sign for Vikno. Finally, we entered, and here's some signs along the way for Horodenka. Finally, we enter the outskirts of Horodenka. Our guide was Ivan Verezek. He's the mayor of Kodakivka, a small town adjacent to Horodenka. Later on in the tour, Ivan took us to visit his uncle, who was 90 years old and was a local historian. We met him later, but we unfortunately did not have any pictures from that visit. The first stop in Horodenka was the Talmud Torah and Yiddish School. We were able to walk there from the center of town. It's currently being transformed into a construction materials storage facility. Here's some shots of a close-up of the stones where the stairs used to be. And then the road alongside the building was headed into the Jewish quarter. And then I managed to find a picture of the original building from the Yizkor book for Horodenka. You can see how similar it looks, and you can see the stairs on the front and the entranceway that's been closed up since then. Building does look a little worn though. We then walked to the Grand Synagogue. This is the second oldest building in town, dating back to the mid-1700s. It was the center of the Jewish community. The street in front, which is the top left, was the heart of the Jewish quarter. Top right, you see a picture of the synagogue. Another bottom left, another picture of the synagogue. The Soviets had turned the building into a wrestling school, and so that the front is very different from its time as a synagogue. However, the rear, which is the bottom right, retains some of the look of the original building. The Soviets had cemented the front entrance. Now, here are some additional views of the building. The front is devoid of ostentation, but the side still has some of the decoration from the original. Again, I was able to find a picture from the Yizkor book, how the building looked in 1930. You can see at top is a little more decorated and a little more flourish, and you can see the main entrance in the center. There was a plaque on the wall, which is one of the few items that recognize what happened there during World War II. I'm not going to read the plaque, but the Nazis ordered Horodenka Jews to gather in the synagogue so they could be inoculated for typhus, which was very common then. However, they then marched everyone to the local forest where they were slaughtered and dumped into mass graves. Our third and last stop in Horodenka was the cemetery. The cemetery is on the outskirts of town and dates back to the 17th century. The cemetery is surrounded by a metal fence, which you can see on bottom left. It is very overgrown with vegetation. Many of the matziva are lying beneath plants and are hard and are impossible to see. Here are some more pictures of the cemetery. Top shows the three of us standing in the ohel, and a couple of pictures of some of the gravestones. And here's a short video I took of walking through the cemetery.
Be careful, a lot of nettles.
Yes, okay.
The hotel.
That was a matziva lying on the ground.
Тут просто, якщо б навіть він стилі створили таку якусь невеличку організацію, ну, все-таки, скажімо так, ті нащадки. І навіть давали би там пару гривень тим людям місцевим, які би це обкошували.
You know, interested in cleaning this site, so locals ready to do this.
in all 50 countries, in all these.
Sasha was talking about getting some local people to help clean up the site.
Зірка це виходить, що це чоловіки, а якщо руки, то це жінки.
Jet and stars means that it's a man buried and hands it's a lady.
Oh, is it?
No, no,
Yes or
he's
not?
asking, he's wondering.
No, the hands mean it's a Kohen.
Ага.
A Kohen, a high priest, descended from the.
Священник.
I'm a Kohen.
Finally, here's a picture of Sasha and Ivan and I in front of the cemetery. Our next stop, Obertin. The road from Horodenka to Obertin is not paved with good intentions. In fact, it is not paved at all. We saw our fair share of cows and monuments along the way. At one monument, we were faced with a decision and looked to a famous philosopher, Casey Stengel, for advice. Have to excuse me one moment. My Alexa decided to start playing music. Alexa off. Sorry about that. So at the fork in the road, it said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. No road signs, bad directions, and roads filled with potholes, so we could not go more than 10 miles an hour for most of the time, turned this 20-mile trip into a 1.5-hour obstacle course. Finally, though, we entered the town of Obertin. Once again, I had no direct evidence that my great-grandfather lived in Obertin, except for the connections through his synagogue and burial plot. I knew he was closely connected with the next town, Hochemirs, a shtetl a few miles away, so I can see why he identified with the town. Obertin is smaller than Horodenka, with the Jewish population only numbering 2,070 in 1900, and was about 1/3 of the town. Our guide in Obertin was Julia Menshikova. Julia had worked as a Polish community leader. She had discovered a book written by Christina Karmi about her life in Obertin prior to World War II and how she survived the war. Julia was so impressed, she decided to write a Ukrainian translation from the original Polish so more people can read the story. We're going to let Julia pick up the story from here.
Yes, and I translated her book, in Ukrainian, and when I, new edition translated from Polish to Ukrainian, this is original and this is my translation. I translated it and made a presentation, and I didn't expect that so many people attend this presentation.
Запросили рабіна з Франківська, був присутній перше після війни.
Rabbi Kolesnik came here. Kolesnik, да?
Так.
Kolesnik came here for this presentation first time after second attended, anything, any event in this Obertin. First time visit of Rabbi, to Obertin after Second World War.
Я відшукала подружок, колегів, якби дуже багато, що пам'ятають, в шоці.
I personally made my homework. I found a lot of friends and school friends, even Ukrainian friends, from Yakimia.
Christina Karmi, Sonia Zorgi.
Christina Karmi, and her Jewish name was Sonia Zorgi. I found her friends, someone, memories who had memories.
Люди пам'ятали, як на розстріл вели її батьків.
And people, I even found some witnesses who remembered how her parents were sent to execution place.
The last picture on the right is was the synagogue or house of Minyan prior to World War II. Upon our return home, we purchased the book, Christina's book, in the English translation, obviously, and also became Facebook friends with Christina. Christina's given name was Sonia Sorger. She was born in 1932 to Eli and Olga and had two older sisters, Ezia and Donia. The first part of her book talks about her happy childhood growing up in Oberton. Her father was a photographer, and the book contains many photos of Sonia, her family, and other people in Oberton. The book features sections by Dr. Marcus Wilbach, who recorded events in Oberton. He kept a diary from 1939 to 1941. This provides some background. The control of the town alternated between Ukrainian nationals, Soviet Red Army, and Hungarian Guards for 2 years until occupied by German soldiers in August 1941. The Nazis immediately issued orders for all Jews over the age of 14 to wear an armband with the Star of David. In April 1942, German authorities issued a public notice that all Jews had to leave Oberton. This is the Kolomia Road, the picture on the left, that was used. Sonia and her family were among those. Sonia writes, "One day we went to the Aryan side through a hole in the fence that was next to the house where we lived in the ghetto. Dad told Mom to take the band off her arm, and then he took off his as well. Dad stopped the cart, and then we drove off." Sonia's family moved constantly to avoid capture over the next 8 months, staying in cellars, stables, box rooms, people's homes, and in other towns. In March 1943, Sonia was 11. Her mother had broken her leg falling off a ladder, and her father had typhus. They were spotted hiding in a barn and reported to the police. The next day, policemen from Oberton came to the barn, arrested her parents, and placed them in a cart to bring them back to Oberton. Her mother convinced one of the policemen by the name of Romanicia to let Sonia go, so he told her to get off the cart. Sonia's mother threw down a bundle of clothes, and Sonia hid under the bridge until the cart was out of sight. The policeman, who knew Sonia and her parents, said he would come back later. This is the last time she saw her parents. The parents were taken to Oberton and placed in this building that had been repurposed as a police station. They had turned the basement into a prison, picture on the right. Her father had stashed razor blades in his shoe and at his belt and had morphine. They slit their wrists in the basement and swallowed the morphine, but it was too cold for the blood to flow freely, and the morphine had gotten wet. The police took the parents to the cemetery in Oberton, where they were placed in an open grave and shot. Sonia was 11 and all alone, hiding below the bridge. This began her more than year-long effort to avoid being captured by the Nazis. The book gives a detailed account as well as she can remember it. At one point, she was discovered and taken to a German officer who, fortunately, had daughters of his own at home and took pity on Sonia. But instead of hiding out again, Sonia insisted on being taken to the police station in Oberton because she was tired of hiding. At the police station, they took her to the basement and locked her up in the same place where her parents had slit their wrists. But Sonia had friends in Oberton, and they arranged her escape. She got on a cart to Horodinka with two policemen, one of them Romanicia, the same policeman who had pushed her off the cart her parents were on earlier. On the way back from Horodinka, Sonia was told to jump off the cart and wait here. And here's a picture of the shrine where she was waiting. The evening, she was picked up and taken back to Oberton to hide. Sonia moved off in between the fall of 1943 and the winter of 1944, finally ending up in an orchard in Kamianka, where she stayed until June 1944, when she saw tanks of Soviet soldiers by the yard and found that the Germans had gone. The ordeal was not over because the Germans started to bomb Oberton, so the family moved towards Kolomia. In Kolomia, Sonia met a girl close to her age who talked Sonia into living with her family and to learn to be a Christian. Sonia accepted the invitation, started catechism lessons, and was baptized on September 2nd, 1944, and renamed Maria Christina Sophia. So Sonia had survived 15 months on her own. Julia had told Sonia's story while we walked around Oberton, and she pointed out items of interest. She had made the presentation to the town for the dedication of the cemetery that she had helped create. Christina was present at the dedication 73 years after the end of the war. All the attendees started to cry after she related how Christina had survived for over a year on her own. Sasha, our guide and translator, was overwhelmed at this point and he started to cry as well.
This was в Коломиї, да?
Так,
And
так,
this was the road, exactly this road. But actually we are going to return to Коломиї. This was the road of, Jews, they were sent through this road to get in Коломиї,
Що не плачемо, нічого, голови догори, ми нічого нікому не винні.
When leaving the house, that
This is the road to the
said,
cemetery.
please cheer up, we are not guilty. We did nothing wrong, so please keep your head up.
Стала на фурці і bardzo się śmiała.
And Polish community of that village, they also were crying. But Ukrainians, nationalists, they didn't, they just...
У нас, що це робили НКВДсти, а тут є прізвища, хто це робив,
for a long
розумієте?
time
Я дуже боялася перекладати цю
For a long
книжку.
time I didn't dare translating it because in the book I found a lot of names that they're like children, grandchildren still in Obertin. Those who reported about Jews, those who simply, helped Germans to execute, and I was pondering if is it to print or not, because
And here's a picture this is a picture of Sonia, Christina in the cemetery, in the forest, where her parents were shot when she came back for the dedication of the cemetery.
this was
Our next stop was the Obertin Cemetery Memorial that Julia had helped create by the publishing of her book. This was one of the most interesting spots we had found in our time in Ukraine. A local businessman, Bodin Stanislavski, owned the property adjacent to the former cemetery and was touched by the story. It was well known that the barn on the property, here's a picture of the barn before it was taken down. It was well known that the barn had used matsivot for the foundation. Here's a picture without the barn on top. And a picture of the cemetery as it was being put together. So the fence and the gates, and you can see some of the matsivot was lying on the ground before it was finished. Bodin decided to donate the land and assist in the recovery of the matsivot. We're going to let Sasha tell you more about it as we explore this memorial.
Stanislavski, after Soviet Union collapsed, immediately he got it into his property, and he decided after they discovered, after the book was translated, they decided to, jointly, they decided to give it to Jewish communities, this area. But the whole area, before the second, it was a cemetery. And
3-4 тисячі.
before the Second World War, around between 3,000-4,000 matzevas, with like gravestone,
Right. How do you say it again? Because I keep
Matsiva,
Massiva.
yes. Was around this area before Second World War. So 3,000-4,000 graves, was first time that Ukrainians have approached like local authority with a request to give it to Jewish authority, not Jewish authority, to Jewish community. Yes, not a single Jew left in Obertin right now, but it became the first time that someone from Christian community approached authority and with a request to commemorate the victims of.
То, власне, на цю огороджу я перепрошую із Ізраїлю,
And
Обертинську.
mostly, this fence and that memorial sign, it was made, upon the investment of Sonia. She like, скільки відсотків вона інвестувала?
Можна сказати, в більшість.
You know, mostly it was her investment. Also, someone from the States and Israel helped her to invest and to build this, you know, to finance this.
І в подяку за ним.
As appreciation to Stanislavski that he, without any benefits, you know, he gave this piece of land. You know, he planted 100 trees in Israel after his name, Stanislavski.
In September 2017, Christina attended the dedication of the memorial and was reunited with some friends she knew growing up in Oberton. Here's Sonia with her friend Lucia, who appears in a picture in her book at age 5. A picture of Christina at the dedication. And she visited the house where she was born and posed for this shot with her family and Julia. The Oberton Memorial was one of the truly outstanding locations that we saw in the Ukraine. And it just shows you some of the things that people have been doing more and more lately to show remnants of Jews that were there, because for many years there were very few memorials. We finished up in Oberton and then took the short drive to Chochimers, now Chotomir, about 5 miles away, northwest of Oberton. Town is easy to find on Jewish Gen Finder. It lies between Oberton on the Ivano-Frankis Road and about 15 miles north of Kolomia. Jewish population was only 298 in 1880 and had dwindled to 160 by 1921. I have an approximate time span of when my Ostfresser family lived in Chochimers using birth, marriage, and death records from JRI Poland. So, for example, Abraham Isaac was born to Wolf and Devora Ostfresser in November 1890 in Kolomia, house 240, 2/4. And his bris took place at 540. He died, though, in Chochimers in 1893. No house number given. Clearly, the family had moved in the interim. The second record I found was for Charles, my great-grandfather's younger brother, born on June 10th, 1890, same birthday as my son. He listed Chochimutz as his birthplace, and sounds a whole lot like Chochimers. So another interesting record. And then we found Rivsia, born in 1893, a younger sister from my great-grandfather, Wolf Ostfresser and Devora Gerstenhaber again, located at Chochimers 250. And I also found records for Frida and Miriam, born in 1896 in Chochimers 250, although they died briefly after that. They lived 12 days only. Clearly, I had a lot of family in Chochimers. Now, I was also able to identify 5 other Ostfresser families living in Chochimers between around 1900 and dating back as far as 1811. Clearly, this small village was home to many members of my Ostfresser family, which explains why Wolf and Devora would have moved there as their family started to grow. Our guide in Chochimers was a school teacher and local historian archivist.
Not only historian teacher, she's a local archivist. She's working with archives here. Я сказав, що ви працюєте ще з архівами також тут.
Ну, тут з архівами, якби я особливо не працюю.
Not many archives left here, not many information, mostly what left even from Chotomir in Ivano-Frankivsk. So, but I have some, I'm going to give you some information.
Okay.
Давайте.
She grew up in Chotomir. Her father is the local mayor. She now lives 20 minutes away in Ivano-Frankivsk. As you can see from the pictures coming up, there are a few paved roads in the village, mostly grass paths or dirt roads. There were no shops in Chotomir, besides maybe a hairdresser.
Not only historian teacher.
We'll let the guide take you through the village.
Yes, and this is the house, and this is the property or former property of local landlord Yalovitsky.
Маєток кінця 17-го, початку 18-го
That
століття.
building is from end of the 17th, beginning of 18th century.
Щоб ви собі розуміли, тут колись була дуже розкішна територія, і односельчани називали цю територію палацом.
And you should understand and imagine that it used to be very superfluous and very like beautiful territory with a very beautiful garden. Yes, and this is the house, and this is the property or former property of local landlord Yalovitsky.
Маєток кінця 17-го, початку 18-го століття.
That building is from end of the 17th, beginning of 18th century.
Щоб ви собі розуміли, тут колись була дуже розкішна територія, і односельчани називали цю територію палацом.
And you should understand and imagine that it used to be very superfluous and very like beautiful territory with a very beautiful garden. And як називали?
Палац.
And
Тобто як королівство, так можете так.
Peasants, they called it like a kingdom with a palace.
Тут було дуже
You
красиво,
can see
були
it's not quite as
фонтани.
beautiful
Very
right now.
beautiful territory with a lot of fountains.
Our next stop was at the schoolhouse in Godembeer.
Да, yes, and she walks into school. Можна зайти все
Ви
всередину?
хочете зайти? Ні, ви закрите
Через
зараз.
вікно, через
Два,
The very huge basement underneath it.
і в роки друг могли заховати.
And during the Second World War, people used that basement like a shelter during the air raid.
Класів.
And now it's a school, like not even a high school, it's like a elementary school, only first nine grades here, you know. Да, yes, and she walks into school. Можна зайти все
Ви
всередину?
хочете зайти? Ні, ви закрите
Через
зараз.
вікно, через
Два,
The very huge basement underneath it.
і в роки друг могли заховати.
And during the Second World War, people used that basement like a shelter during the air raid.
Класів.
Continuing on our tour,
Так, зараз
Now we go
те,
to
що
the
вас
Jewish
зацікавить,
quarter. This is a kindergarten, but this is already Jewish quarter.
Oh,
це нова будівля.
so it would be in this vicinity.
Yes.
Це національна.
So the landlord house ended right here, and this is how started like Jewish quarter.
Я вам можу. Так, зараз
Now we go
те,
to
що
the
вас
Jewish
зацікавить,
quarter. This is a kindergarten, but
I
this
had a
is
little trouble
already
with my
Jewish
slides.
quarter.
так, зараз
Now we go
те,
to
що
the
вас
Jewish
зацікавить,
quarter. This is a kindergarten, but this is already Jewish quarter.
Oh,
це нова будівля.
so it would be in this vicinity.
Yes.
Це національна.
So the landlord house ended right here, and this is how started like Jewish quarter.
Я вам можу.
Yes, and according to my research, I was getting ready for our tour. You know, in village at the time in 1938, the population of the village was
991 особа.
2,991 people living in the village,
Із них 170 євреїв.
and 170 were Jews.
170.
Oh, really? Only 170?
Yes, in 1938.
1938, yes.
Це все.
Now this is a shuttle, and everything you can see here, this is a shuttle.
Це був центр
And now we get
села,
real.
This
де був ярмарок.
And this is exactly the place where market used to be. You know, this area was a marketplace.
Звідси так починався ярмарок, він продовжувався туди до польського костьому.
And
Сюди
the market
приїжджали.
started from here and stretched straight to the Polish. It was like a venue. The people from like surrounding area In some cases, even from Colombia, they came here looking for some particular product, and they buy and they bought and sold products here on this market. And this is exactly the Jewish quarter.
Well, this was the picture is where the Jewish quarter was. This is the Polish cathedral built in 1812. The Soviets had turned it into a warehouse of poisonous chemicals. After that, nobody wanted to go there. We left the Polish cathedral and started to walk back to the Jewish quarter.
Yes, let's go to the address you are interested.
Okay.
In 18th century, the village was very flourishing.
And Sasha is explaining how the village flourished in the 17th and 18th century, and there were members from all nationalities.
Consisted of Germans, Poles, Armenians, Jews, like now.
Right. So I was wondering, because one of the things I've wondered is why would my ancestors move here?
And we finally reached. We walked from the Polish cathedral back to the Jewish quarter. There were no paved paths, just a grass strip between two rows of houses. The guide stopped and pointed to this house.
Yes, I visited that elderly man who is from this village, you know, who was from 1931, and he pointed, this is a new house. It's not the old, but he pointed to the address I sent.
250 was
250.
Right.
250. It was here. It was here. He said it was here.
Yes, those are all my great-grandfather's brothers and sisters.
This is the name of Freda. Freda, she used to live here. Exactly this place. This is for sure. She just cross-checked from different sources. And this is a place, you know, 250 it was here.
Okay. So,
Not this house, but
Right,
this,
right,
but
right.
this place. But we don't have what kind of business she had, what was her family, what she
they
was
were
doing.
tailor. Well, my great-grandfather was a tailor, and I think his father was a tailor. But this is the record that shows that he lived at this address.
This was the house of Chochimir's 250 that we had found.
Yes, I did.
It's hard to describe the feeling of standing at a spot that my ancestors lived 130 years ago.
Oh, Mike is shocked. This is the first time that we've been someplace where I can almost guarantee my great-grandfather lived. Not physically in that particular physical structure, but on that spot.
Your grandfather?
Great-grandfather. And great-great-grandfather.
I was momentarily stunned, I have to admit, and didn't know what to do. We kept walking away from the house before I came to my senses and went back to have this picture taken in front of the house. My great-grandfather, along with his parents and up to 7 siblings, lived here together and walked the paths of the village every day. Why did he leave at the age of 20? Did he move out before he immigrated to America? Could he have lived in Obertin or Colombia for a period of time? By the late 1800s, this area was poor. Maybe his family designated him to go to America to start a new life so others could follow, as his brothers Jacob and Charles did a few years later.
How you doing?
We continued to walk around Chodomir, and here's a couple more pictures of what the village looks like. The top left was supposedly a Jewish hairdresser named Schubert. This house was across the street, if you call it, across the grass from my great-grandfather's house. House on Bonham is decorated for a wedding. This happened to be the guide's parents' house. They're celebrating her brother's wedding. And then while some of the houses, many of the houses were fairly nice, here's an abandoned house that was also on that same street. A few other pictures from the village. This house, I believe, was a schoolroom. Again, it's on that same grass path that we were walking on where my great-grandfather's house was. And this building was supposedly a house of minion, and the Soviets turned it, which the Soviets ruined and turned into a school. Our last stop in Hodemir was at the cemetery. Now, the cemetery is going to be behind that White House, and we were not able to walk down to see it, though.
Over there, just a few meters.
Sasha explains.
You know, nothing left from the cemetery, but it was a Jewish cemetery. She said that if you go, and because during the Second World War, Jews, you know, they gathered, I mean Germans and Ukrainian police, they gathered Jews in the center of the village, and they made them march to the cemetery, and killing happened on the cemetery. During Soviet time, no memorials, nothing, not a single sign. And cemetery still exists, you know, it was not looted, but you can't see anything because those like matsivas, they are underground, they are covered with, you know, so we can look from here, you know, that building, white building, she said, the cemetery is just behind that white building, you know, but this is what happened here. Yes, and Soviets, you know, those matsivas survived Soviet during Soviet time.
Ні, я не за це, ми за другого. За це я знаю, так.
Yes, and Soviets, they took those matsivas and they, you know, used them for like sidewalks, you know, just to pave sidewalks, exactly. This is what they did. And what really survived, she said definitely, she said 100%, many matsivas, because cemetery was big, many matsivas, they are just underground, survived, you know, but, you know, covered with some, you know, with some, like,
and Sasha is saying how many matsivas did survive.
Soil, you know, and my husband, he has, he was allocated, his family was allocated with some kind of garden, and when they started like planting something, they, you know, at the edge of their piece of land, they found some, you know, some stones of matsiva, because they are covered slightly with, you know, not really deep, you know, underground, what survived. But everything that was on the surface was taken by Soviets, and they paved yes, and even during Soviet time, when they, you know, tried to cultivate that area, to turn it into the garden, they abandoned eventually the idea because they found some skulls there, and this is how they,
Sasha's last line is that they said they when they went to plant a garden, they found some skulls.
It was a cemetery, so nobody's doing, you know, anything there, you know.
We finished in Hodemir and started on our way to Ivanitsi. Keep in mind that we did Kolomia the day before, and now it was we had done Horodenka, Obertin, and Hodemir in one day, and we were on our last leg. And so besides being tired from just being out all day, we were emotionally drained from the various circumstances and experiences that we had just had. So we got to Ivanitsi, which is formerly Ivanochi. It's too small a town to appear in Jewish Gen, but it is mentioned often in records for my Gerstenhaber family. Devora Gerstenhaber, my great-great-grandmother, came from Ivanochi. Unfortunately, records do not exist before 1882, or at least I have not been able to find any. But the first record appears in 1884 for Sosha, where here's her record where she's living at 146 in Iwanochi. The Ostresses all lived at 146, and many Gerstenhabers lived at number 29. The building shown here is the local community center, which doubles as City Hall. It contains offices for town officials, a library, housing town records, and some meeting rooms. The town has a medical center, some shops, such as a grocery store and an elementary school. We asked what people do for a living, and Vasil said that it was very complicated. Because of the lack of work in Ukraine, many people go to work in Poland, Belgium, and Israel. They make decent money while away for a couple of years, and then they come back to live. We introduced ourselves and we sat in a room in the council, in the city hall, and told them why we had come to Ivanizi. We had hoped to find any records or indication of my great-great-grandfather's family living here in the 1880s. Since we had 2 house numbers, we were hoping we could identify where they lived. Unfortunately, Vasile and Nikolai were not able to match to any of the old maps. However, we did learn that Nikolai was born in 1933 and lived in the nearby village of Tomachik all his life. He was 9 when Nazis came to the area in 1942. Nikolai handed us this note, handwritten note he had prepared for us. He indicated this was a list of people he had hid who had hid in Ivanizi or Tomachik during World War II. He knew everybody on the list and gave the impression his family had helped hide them. Nikolai explained, and Sasha translated, when they came here, the Jews, to festival, they participated in a number of businesses. For example, they participated in moonshine, cattle, livestock. It was not possible for me to participate, for my family to come. I should ask permission. The Nazis started killing things, and in 1943, all the Jews who were not hiding, after they registered for work here, but not long, after that, but not long, they took them from here, registered them, they took them to Kolomia ghetto. From ghetto, nobody returned back. They took them to the forest, which we visited yesterday. And so the note says before 1942, there were Jews living in our village, and he goes on to list a bunch of names. These are mostly first names. He also listed Poles and Germans and finishes off by saying, the Jewish Yankel Sosha went to school with me until the 3rd grade. In 1943, Sosha was taken away by the Germans and all the Jews from the village. And Sasha and Nikolai had prepared this note specifically for us. Vasile then went into the library and came back with a book on Ivanizi. It is in Ukrainian, but I leafed through it anyway. I come to a page that has a date of 1825, and Sasha translates that as a list of taxpayers. As I slide my finger down the page, I come across a familiar name. There on line 21 is David Gerstenhaber, living at house 29. I had found numerous records on J.R.I. Poland for Gerstenhaber's living at house 29, including a few Davids. He could be Devorah's uncle or great uncle or even grandfather. After getting as much as we could from the Ivanizi book, Vasile pulled out the town map and opened it up fully. It was a good thing he had long arms. I took pictures of each section, so I now have my own dedicated map of the town. The very bottom shows the Prut River, which defines the southern border of the town, and which we visited later. You can make out a large building in the center, the small retail area on the left, which included the administration building, and a couple of mid-sized buildings, which were likely the 3 churches that we passed by later on. We left the administration building and proceeded to drive around Ivanizi. The town is spread out. We stayed mainly in our car, so some of the pictures are fuzzy or at funny angles. But here are a couple of the houses in Ivanizi. They look in generally good shape. Some more houses of driving around. We went to the Prut River, where there was a family having a picnic, which turned out to be the mayor of Tomachik, the town next to Ivanizi. Here's the new Greek Orthodox Church close by to the old Orthodox Church, which is 400 years old. And there's also a church for Jehovah's Witnesses in town. Vasile pointed out the classroom across the street from the administration building, which used to be a house of minyan. As we returned to the administration center, Vasile wanted to know our impression of the village. He seemed very intent on promoting the village for tourism, which is why he took us to the Prut River. I told him, it seems very pleasant, has wonderful views, access to the river. I really did not know what else to say. It was Nikolai's turn to talk again, and he wanted to return to the topic of the list. There is one point in his talk where Nikolai is speaking, and you clearly hear the word Gestapo, but Sasha translates it as German.
Тих, що я там написав, у вас всіх знав, всіх до
Yeah, the
одного.
list of those people I gave you, you know, I knew everyone from
Really?
that list, you know.
Ти
I'll just, I know we really didn't talk about it that much, but how did you keep them hidden?
Як ми не говорили,
тайні.
for example,
Зимувала, а
Zayda,
літом так.
there were different approaches. For example, Zayda, she was hosted by like a local priest, Greco-Catholic
Так, так, так.
Greek Catholic priest, and she was staying like in his barn all the time. Winter, you know, you can imagine how cold it was, and it was probably it was the most secure place for her to stay, you know. So this is.
І ви думаєте, що німці приходили до священника, він знав німецьку мову, священник. Приходили гестапо, тоді, наприклад, і обшуки ніякі не робили. Але поговорили з німцями, а в той час вони навіть були усі.
And when Germans came to the house of that priest, he spoke German, and when they came, you know, they just interrogated, talked to him, but didn't search the house. And at that time, Zayda, she was hidden, you know, in the barn, you know.
І ще двоє, куди поділися, не знаємо до неї.
Yes, and two family, they escaped from ghetto. Nobody knows how they managed to do this, and they returned back to the village. And а хто поговорив? Німці приходили, допитували, да?
Так.
And Germans, they came back. How we knew that? How we found out that they escaped? Because Germans came here and they searched, you know, their neighbors, everyone, you know, but we don't know what happened to them. You know, they didn't.
It was the first time I can recall that we had actually spoken to a witness of events that had taken place during World War II. Then Vasile's mother spoke, and she told us an interesting story that she had witnessed firsthand in later years.
Yes, and another girl, she was very, very small. Her family is the same like family of Sonia in Albertine. The family was taken, and she was like not adopted, but taken by local family, living just behind the minion, you know. And they provided her with a shelter. They kept her either in the basement when it was too dangerous, or like between them, you know. And this is how, after the Second World, after Ukraine became independent, she also came back here, you know, and she paid like reciprocate for what they did. And gradually, she took from that family. She took her friend, her mate at the time. They were just girls, small girls. And when she returned, she took that lady to the States, and later they just one by one the whole family moved to the States because of, yes.
So,
Yes, we are going to give the address. We are going to give you the address.
oh yes, yes.
Vasil is going to send address. Okay.
Unfortunately, we never did get the address. But finally, Sasha, after 2 days together, spoke up.
Have any of these stories been written down?
What is
I would imagine there are groups that would be very interested in hearing these stories and having them documented.
People need to know what happened because we didn't know in the States, we didn't know about so much happening here in Ukraine. We heard about Germany and France and Poland, but we didn't hear about Ukraine.
I can tell you why. Because when some representatives after Ukraine became independent, and when some representatives from Ukraine were invited to Yad Vashem, and we went to Yad Vashem, they found only in 1991, if I'm not mistaken, only 3 or 5 persons from Ukraine living in Ukraine, citizens of Ukraine, were on the list of Yad Vashem righteous people of the world. You know? And they got so completely surprised, and they returned back, and they found a lot of information. And now Ukraine is the 4th biggest country, you know, after Poland, after Belgium, after France. Ukraine is the 4th biggest country of righteous people living in Ukraine. Provided shelters, saved Jews, you know.
Right.
Якщо я там написав у вас усі, я
Have,
send you
have any?
I know the time is late, and Ivano Frankis is not one of our ancestral towns, so I'm going to go through the last few very quickly till I get to my closing slide. We had spent the morning in Kolomia, so this is our final shot in Kolomia. In the afternoon, the road to Ivano Frankis is well paved, and we still managed to see our typical view of people walking their cows. When we got to Ivano Frankis, it's a big city of 248,000 people. There's lots of traffic, and there are electrical wires that still exist for public transportation. Ivano Frankis Cemetery is a mass grave site. There are a number of plaques commemorating local towns that were victims of mass executions, such as the bottom left and the one in the middle. There are also groupings of graves as well as the picture on the right. We visited the Ivano Frankis synagogue to meet with Rabbi Kolesnik, the rabbi for Ukraine. Rabbi Kolesnik had attended the opening of the memorial in Oberton. He asked us which towns we were interested in and then produced hundreds of documents relating to those towns. We ended up taking pictures of roughly 300 documents, which I am still reviewing. I did manage to see another Gerstenhaber cousin in one of the tax records. A few more pictures of Ivano Frankis. The picture on the left is one of the final shots from our trip. It is symbolic of what we saw and what we already knew, that by the end of the war, only 1% of the Jewish population remained. The picture on the right served as a perfect summation of our trip. As we were leaving Ivanitsi, Nikolai handed me a brochure for a local church and said, "This is my work, what I've done. This is Tovmachik village. This is my present to you." I was not sure what it was, but he was very proud of it, and I accepted it gratefully. I translated it when I returned home. Nikolai is a carpenter, and he had done all the restoration work on this historic church. The brochure was an advertising piece to encourage people to visit the church. He was very proud of his work. One line in particular struck me. It said, "The God-hating communist government tried to erase the memory of the sanctity of this place with all its might, but God's providence ruled otherwise." Add in the additional word Nazis, and this seemed to be a fitting phrase for many of the memories of our visit. The Nazis and the Soviet Union had done their best to eliminate any evidence of my ancestors and the Jews of Galicia. But the memory lives on in our genealogy work, in memorials, in reclamation of cemeteries, in the work of people like Yasha Zalachaika in Kolomia, and finally in the return of a Jewish population to some of the major cities. Thank you it's time to go home. Time to board our Ukrainian international flight back to New York. Thank you for joining me on my virtual tour of Galicia. Bonnie, I turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. With 1 minute to spare. You made it in. But your wife took really good notes. So she wrote down some of the comments for you to follow up on. And of course, I can give you the chat too. So you had Cheryl Stahl, who's the Kahila Links owner for Kolomia. So she's been on asking a few questions. And I guess I'll just ask like one. So there are does anybody have records that who's buried in the cemeteries that you visited, or?
Not as far as I know.
Okay.
I thought certainly when I was in Horodenka, it would have been really just a project to be able to take pictures of all the Matsivot to just see what you can find out. Same thing in Oberton, as things were lying on the ground. They were fragments, but you just didn't. I don't know if anyone has really documented anything from those places.
And like in the museums that have the records books, are those photographed or digitized, or are they just?
I don't know. I don't think so. I think they're just remnants. I don't think there's anything of tangible value there. I had asked in every town, do they have records? And generally I got no. The Asha may have some records, although he did say I know a lot of the records in Columbia were burned up in a fire a number of years back, I think in 2015. And that's kind of typical in a lot of these places. Keep in mind, the synagogue in Columbia was not a synagogue until 1966. So anything that had been there prior was destroyed.
Okay, and I mean, I know you're a travel agent, but Annette's asking how difficult was it to arrange tour guides and transportation?
It really wasn't that difficult because I had an excellent recommendation. Rhoda Miller had done a similar trip and had suggested a travel agent who specializes in these types of trips in the Ukraine. So I contacted her. She ended up putting together the basic itinerary. I had told her, these are the towns I want to visit. She had the guide. So Sasha was her guide in the area. And then Sasha did all the legwork, finding the local guides for each town. So all I had to do was provide them with my research, and then they took it from there.
Right. Does anybody else have questions? I know it's after 4 o'clock. I just want to remind everybody that our next meeting will be Wednesday, October 13th, where we have Michael Morgenstern about using the forwards, the Yiddish forward for your research. So that should be very interesting. And then we have Lara Diamond, October 24th, our next Sunday meeting in October. So anybody else have any questions? We can probably unmute everybody. Anybody wants to say anything? Alex, you still there? Allow.
No, I
Okay, I can do it. Yeah. So, anybody else want to ask a question?
Okay, people should be able to unmute themselves.
Unmute themselves. You can probably unmute yourselves if you want. So,
Somebody had asked what what most people did in Hodomirs, what their usual occupation was. I believe they were farmers, most of them. Others traveled into neighboring towns to do work there.
That's my impression. There was a lot of, right now there's a lot of farm equipment lying around, a lot of tractors. So I believe that there were a lot of farmers, and generally others worked in Oberton, because Oberton had all the stores, and some may have even gone as far as Columbia. But generally it was more of a very rural community.
go ahead.
My family, I had a lot from Kolomea, but they also used to reference Zablutov and Olishus, like kind of it being in the same area. Does anyone know, are they? Because
yes, Zablutov I know is close by. I think what I find is that, like, my great grandfather put down Kolomea as his town,
right?
But he really was born in Ivanochi and lived in Hochimirs.
Right.
So I think that what they would identify is just like if you said, if I said I'm from New York or Suffolk County, rather than saying Dix Hills, because people outside of the area probably wouldn't know, what I'm talking about, but they would know New York. So I think a lot of people would identify with the town, the major town closest to them. And that's the way the documents mostly read.
Okay.
Is Zittamar anywhere near there?
I'm not sure. I believe it's in the same general area, in that big rectangle that I had pointed out, but I'm not sure where it was specifically.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Anyone on YouTube? I know there's only a few people. You type a question.
It sounded like a great trip, a very emotional trip, and I thank you for the presentation.
You're welcome. And it's funny because we look for our ancestors, and that's not necessarily what we found. And we did find a little bit, but we found a lot of information about what happened during the Holocaust. That was a huge part of what we saw there. And we were able to see the various communities where they lived, not necessarily what they were like back in the 1900s, certainly, but at least what they, a little bit of what they could have been, particularly going from a city like Kolomea, which is 60,000 people, and to Khodamir, which was like 3,000 people. You can see the vast difference in the types of communities that they lived in.
Can I ask another question? I saw that it was all very rural, and I only saw automobiles in where it was paved. How did those people in the very rural areas get to doctors, pharmacies, higher secondary education, stores, and whatever? Did they use cars too, or were they still using horseback and carts? Or do you have any idea?
I don't really know. My focus has always been on around the year 1900 and before that, because my great-grandfather moved out in 1902.
No, I'm talking about just when you were visiting.
For now?
Yes.
Well, like a town like Khodamir, the school there goes up to grade 9. So they have their own primary school, but for secondary school, they have to go into Oberton. And they mostly have cars. I mean, we did see a lot of cars and driveways, but a lot of the houses were like the house that my great-grandfather grew up in. That street was just a grass path. Maybe on the other side there was an entrance onto a more paved road, but we really didn't see it. And a lot of the roads were dirt roads, so they would just pull out. I mean, we did see a few cars. So I imagine people in the towns have cars, and that's how they get around. I think I saw a lot more tractors than I did cars, though.
To my son, Jeff, your father would have loved this, honey.
You're welcome. I see Cheryl asked about Ivanochi because she can't find it on the map. It's going to be about 8 to 10 miles west of Kolomea. You have to blow up the map a little bit because it's a really small town, and it's right next to another town. I don't really have the pronunciation properly, called Nechin. So that's one way of tracking it down.
I have a question. Did you go through any Yisker books or any previous material before you went on your tour?
I read the Kolomea. There's a lot of pages from the Kolomea Yisker book online. So I did read through a lot of that, but there's a lot of it that had not been translated. And I just saw on Gesher Galicia that book has been released. So that would have been a wonderful resource to have prior. Although there were a lot of pages online that I was able to read through. I did purchase the Horodenka Yisker book when I came home. And that's been very interesting.
So would you recommend, if somebody's going to go on a tour, going through documents and checking the Yisker books before you go?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a great resource in researching. If you're lucky, you can find a name in the book, because there's a lot of stories. But for the most part, you're going to find stories of what life was like prior to World War II. We're not going to necessarily go back to 1900, but you'll get stories from 1910, 1920. So it really gives you a picture of what took place in those villages, those towns, prior to the war. And when you read through them, it's really interesting to see how my sense of like the 1920s is a long time ago, but people were living their lives and going out to concerts and shows and all kinds of things when you read through the Yisker book. So they're great resources.
Thank you.
Bye, Stu.
Hi, Stuart. Wait. Can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Can't hear you.
He's unmuted.
Stuart, I can't hear you.
No, now you're muted. You were unmuted.
No,
Not getting audio from him.
No, we're not hearing you, unfortunately.
can't hear you.
This
He
was
doesn't,
wonderful.
he doesn't know why either. Okay.
I have
Call him, Stuart. Call him on the phone.
Stuart is one of my father's second cousin. So, or third cousin, what? No. So from his great grandmother, his grandmother, Haya, was my great grandfather's oldest sister. So,
Jeff, it was a wonderful presentation. And I also toured with Sasha, as Jeff mentioned, and it was just great to see and hear him in action again. I totally get your experience.
Sasha was a wonderful tour guide, and he was very invested in the subject.
Yes, yes. And he goes really out of his way to do the research before your feet hit the ground.
I thought it was amazing how he found Julia in Oberton, for example. That was just an amazing story that really touched us, and it was something that we never expected to come across.
Very nice.
Yeah, we couldn't.
Sorry, Stuart, I don't know what's going on.
Anyway, okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Mom.
Okay, it was great. It was great. Even if I heard it for the second time.
Stuart, if you want to ask a question, maybe type it in the chat.
Oh, maybe he can do that.
Yeah. That's just funny, Jeff. My son Adam's middle name is Austin, so seeing Adam Austin is just.
Oh, that's funny. And I currently have the Kolomia portion of our trip is up on Jewish Gen in the Kahila links. So, and I'm gonna try to do Horodenka next, which was the next largest city.
Right. Yeah. So if anybody has ever done that, always check for the Kahila Links page for your town to see if you have anything that you can contribute, because I'm sure the Kahila Links webmaster will be very grateful. Anybody else? It's coming up on 4:15, so I want to thank everybody for coming. This is great, Jeff. And again, I said October 13th is our next meeting. So happy Sukkot and what is it? Shmini Atzeret, Simchas Torah, whatever's coming up next.
The parade of holidays.
Holidays, right? We're almost done.
And just for those, Michael Morgenstern's I sat through Michael Morgenstern's presentation at JGS, and he was excellent. It was really interesting to see how to use I never thought about using the Forverse as a research tool.
Stuart wrote something in the chat. Can you see it?
Yes.
So they had to come all the way to America to meet somebody from 20 miles away.
Yep.
That's great. That's great.
I just want to add in Jeff's commercial about Michael Morgenstern's The Next Talk. I listened to his recording from the conference, and would you believe I found my great-grandfather in the gallery of missing husbands with a picture. So it's amazing, incredible. Listen to his talk in October.
Oh, somebody at the beginning asked what that was when I mentioned that. So yeah,
I'm gonna
now you know.
Guys, I'm gonna have to run.
Okay.
So I'm gonna say goodbye. Unfortunately, I have to get on a phone call.